Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today
Ooh, deep dive.
into something I think you're going to find really interesting, innovation.
Yeah.
But not just like a quick glance.
Right.
We're going to go deep.
I like
And
it.
we're going to do it with, thanks to a book by Matt Ridley called How Innovation Works.
Yeah, this book is really something special, It takes this big historical perspective on innovation,
Okay.
and it really busts some myths along the way.
So let's talk about a myth. Let's bust one right now.
Okay.
What about that idea of the lone genius,
Oh, yeah.
the eureka moment?
Right. The light bulb goes off and boom, everything changes.
Exactly. And Ridley says that's rarely how it goes down.
Yeah, it's more like an evolution, building on what came before. Like, think about the steam engine. James Watt gets all the credit, but he was actually improving on the work of a lot of other people.
Like Thomas Newcomen.
Exactly. You know him.
I do now. Not from school, though.
Yeah. I don't think they teach that in most schools. He built the first practical steam engine.
And even then, Watt's improved engine, it wouldn't have taken off without the Ridley brothers.
Totally. They were the entrepreneurs who really pushed for it to be used in different industries.
So it was a group effort.
Always is.
Even way back then.
Uh-huh.
So no lone geniuses just toiling away.
It happens, but it's not the whole story.
So this is really changing how I think about innovation already.
Yeah, and you know what that means? It means you don't have to wait for some massive breakthrough.
Okay.
There's a lot of potential in those small improvements.
So it's not about sudden flashes of brilliance.
Right.
It's like Edison said.
What do you say?
Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So what does drive innovation if it's not just those brilliant moments?
Well, Ridley says trial and error plays a much bigger role than we realize.
Makes sense.
And it's messy. Lots of dead ends and unexpected turns.
Like, what's a great example? Slick water fracking.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Revolutionized the energy industry.
Huge.
But it almost didn't happen.
Really?
George Mitchell was ready to give up.
Wow.
But his engineer, Nick Steinsberger, would not quit.
I like this guy.
And so what happened? Did he have some amazing insight?
Well, not exactly. He accidentally discovered that using more water in the fracking fluid was the key.
Wow.
They were desperate, and that little tweak changed everything.
Wow. It really makes you think about all the things we owe
Right.
to people who just keep plugging away, even when it looks bleak.
Yeah. But, it's not just about individual grit.
Okay.
Ridley also points out that the system matters. Like in America, you've got this focus on property rights and this whole culture of risk-taking.
Right.
That played a big part in fracking success.
So a supportive environment is key.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that brings us to another interesting point.
Okay, hit me.
Innovation doesn't always have to be high-tech.
I like where this is going.
Think about the S-bend in toilets.
Right. Not exactly rocket science.
Yeah. But try living without it.
Oh, I don't want to...
No way.
Revolutionize sanitation, public health.
It did.
We totally take it for granted.
Totally.
Or what about corrugated iron?
Yeah.
It's cheap, durable, used everywhere.
Yeah. It is.
From sheds to grand estates.
It really is.
Right.
It's amazing how something so simple can have such a huge impact.
It is.
Yeah.
And you know what these examples show us? They help us broaden our definition of what even counts as innovation.
Okay.
It's not always the flashiest technology. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones that solve everyday problems.
Makes you rethink what it even means to be innovative.
Yeah, it opens up a whole world of possibilities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've busted the lone genius myth.
We did.
We've seen how trial and error
With a little luck sometimes.
and some luck
Yeah.
play a role, and we've learned that innovation doesn't have to be all high-tech.
Right.
So what other surprises does Ridley have in store? Well, he talks a lot about how the success of an innovation often depends on timing and context.
Okay.
Like a great example is wheeled luggage.
Oh, yeah. People had the idea for that a long time ago, but it didn't really take off.
It didn't. It only really became a hit when air travel became more common and airports got bigger.
That's true.
Suddenly, those rolling suitcases went from a novelty to a necessity.
So it's not enough to just have a great idea.
Nope.
The world has to be ready for it.
The world's gotta be ready.
This is giving me a lot to think about.
It is a lot.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of positive stuff here.
Yeah.
But innovation isn't always this smooth ride, right? What about the downsides?
Yeah. Unfortunately, not all innovation is good.
Right.
And even good ideas can have unintended consequences.
Like, what about the Theranos scandal?
Oh, yeah. Classic case of hype over substance.
That whole story is wild.
It is. They fooled so many people for so long.
They did.
It really shows how a good story and a charismatic leader can overshadow the lack of real work in technology.
And how do we even tell the difference?
Yeah, that's the tough part.
How do we know what's real? What's hype?
Especially in a world where everything's moving so fast.
Right.
It's not always easy to separate those things.
Okay, so that's a clear case of fraud.
Yeah.
But what about innovations that fail for, not such nefarious reasons?
Sure.
Like maybe they're just not practical. Or they're too expensive.
Yeah.
What about those?
Those happen all the time.
Okay.
Like the Hyperloop.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard of that?
Oh, yeah. That was a big buzzword a few years ago.
Right. That super fast train and a vacuum tube.
So futuristic.
Right. So what happened to it?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, it's got some major engineering challenges.
Okay.
Even Elon Musk, who loves the idea, says it's probably going to be way more expensive and harder to build than they originally thought.
So maybe not the revolution in transportation it was supposed to be.
Maybe not, but it really captured the imagination.
It did.
It shows you how sometimes the reality is just a lot more complex.
So we've got outright fakes.
Yep.
We've got overhyped ideas.
Huh?
Are there other ways innovations can miss the mark?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Sometimes the world just isn't ready.
Like
wheeled luggage.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Bad timing. Exactly. Bad timing. Ridley says this happens a lot.
Okay,
Things like infrastructure, social norms, even just cultural attitudes can make or break an innovation.
So we got fake bomb detectors, super expensive transportation systems.
Right.
And ideas that are just ahead of their time.
Ahead of their time.
What other types of failures does Ridley talk about?
Well, he talks about innovations that fail because something better comes along.
Okay.
Like, remember CFLs?
The compact fluorescent light bulb.
Yeah, those curly bulbs that are supposed to be so energy efficient.
Okay, yeah, those are everywhere.
They were everywhere. And then LEDs came along.
And just blew them out of the water.
Blew them out. LEDs are even better.
Right.
More efficient.
Yeah.
Longer lasting. No mercury. Yeah.
So even though CFLs were a step in the right direction, they ended up being what Ridley calls a misinnovation.
Misinnovation.
Misinnovation. I love that word.
It's a good word.
It wasn't that they were a bad idea.
Right.
They just got outdone.
Yeah.
And sometimes an innovation can be successful for a while, but then it declines or disappears.
That's about, like, nuclear power.
Nuclear power. Oh, yeah, that's a good example.
It was the future.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah, and what happened?
Well, there were safety concerns. Costs went way up.
And what about the waste?
The waste is a whole other problem.
Yeah.
So even though nuclear power is efficient and potentially good for the environment, it's run into some roadblocks.
Yeah.
Ridley argues that part of the problem is that the technology hasn't been allowed to really evolve.
Because of regulations and public fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fear has led to all these super strict rules.
Right.
Which have made it really expensive.
So it's this balance
Balance,
between safety and progress.
Right.
You don't want to stifle innovation, but you also got to be careful.
Absolutely.
And I think all these examples show us that innovation, it's not a smooth, predictable path.
Right.
It's about taking risks and learning from what doesn't work.
Okay, so we've explored the pitfalls, but I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about good innovations being actively resisted.
Oh, yeah, like coffee.
Coffee. What's the story with coffee?
Oh, it's fascinating.
Okay.
When it first came to Europe, it was opposed by everyone.
Really?
Vested interests, moral crusaders, governments.
So it was a bad thing.
They thought it was addictive, bad for your health, a tool of the devil.
Wow.
And now
we can't live without it.
Now we live it.
People loved the energy boost, the social aspect, the coffee houses.
Right.
But it's a good reminder that even innovations that seem good to us now can face a real uphill battle.
What about today? Are there any modern examples of this resistance?
Oh, tons. Look at GMOs vaping the internet itself.
Yeah.
They've all faced pushback for different reasons.
Yeah.
So it's like this constant tension.
It is a constant tension.
Between innovation and resistance.
It speaks to our nature, you know? We want progress, but we're also afraid of change.
Right. Makes sense.
Especially when it challenges the status quo.
Okay, so we've seen how innovation can fail. Fraud, impracticality, bad timing.
And even just resistance.
So with all this in mind, I'm really curious to explore what actually makes for a successful innovative society?
Yeah, what allows innovation to truly flourish?
What are the ingredients?
That's the question. And luckily, Ridley tackles that too.
Okay.
He argues that there are certain conditions that seem to really foster innovation,
Okay.
like freedom of thought, open markets, and a culture that embraces risk-taking.
Those sound like some big, juicy topics.
They are.
I'm excited to unpack all of that.
Let's do it. Let's delve into the recipe for a truly innovative society.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not just about celebrating the successes.
Okay.
Ridley actually dedicates a whole chapter in his book to fakes, frauds, fads, and failures.
That's a great title. It is, and it makes you realize that failure is a part of the process.
Because they say you got to break a few eggs
Right.
to make an omelet.
Exactly.
Right.
So what about some of those cautionary tales?
Okay, yeah, let's hear them.
What are some of the innovations that just didn't pan out?
Okay.
Well, one that really stands out to me are these fake bomb detectors.
What? Fake bomb detector?
Sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
But they were sold to governments and security forces all over the world.
So they didn't work?
Not at all.
Wow.
They were based on this pseudoscientific idea called dowsing.
Dowsing. Like with a stick?
Yeah, like using a forked stick to find water or whatever.
So basically they were selling this bogus technology to people who were desperate for a solution.
It's pretty scary when you think about it.
That's terrifying.
It shows how fear and desperation can really create a market for these fake innovations.
It really highlights the importance of critical thinking,
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to something as important as security.
Okay, so that's a clear-cut case of fraud. But what about those innovations that fail for less, nefarious reasons? Maybe they're just not practical or the cost is too high.
What about those?
Yeah, those happen all the time.
Okay.
Like the Hyperloop.
The Hyperloop, yeah.
You know that one?
Yeah, that was a big buzzword a few years ago.
Right, that super fast train in a vacuum tube.
It sounded so cool.
Super futuristic.
So what happened? Did it fizzle out?
Well, there are some major engineering challenges.
Okay.
Even Elon Musk has admitted it's probably going to be a lot more expensive and difficult to build than they initially thought.
So maybe not the revolution in transportation it was hyped up to be?
Maybe not, but it captured the imagination.
It did, for sure.
And it shows how the reality of innovation can be a lot more complex than the initial hype.
Okay, so we've got outright fakes,
Yeah.
overhyped ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other ways innovations can just sort of miss the mark?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes the world just isn't ready.
Like what?
Remember wheeled luggage?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Great idea, bad timing.
Bad timing.
Ridley says this happens a lot.
Right.
Things like infrastructure, social norms, even just cultural attitudes, they can all influence whether an innovation takes off or not.
Interesting.
So you got to have the right environment.
So we got fake bomb detectors,
Right.
super expensive transportation systems that might not even work,
Mm-hmm.
and ideas that are just ahead of their time.
Ahead of their time.
What other types of failures does Ridley talk about?
He also talks about innovations that fail because something better comes along. Like, remember CFLs?
Those curly light bulbs?
Yeah, those were supposed to be so energy efficient.
Yeah, I remember those. They were everywhere for a while.
They were everywhere. And then LEDs came along.
And just blew them out of the water.
LEDs are more efficient, longer lasting. They don't have that mercury problem.
Right.
So CFLs were a step in the right direction.
Okay.
But they ended up being what Ridley calls misinnovation.
Misinnovation. I like that word.
It's a good one, right? It's not that they were bad.
Just that something better came along.
Yeah, it's like Betamax.
Exactly.
A good idea that just got outdone.
Okay, so what about an innovation that was successful for a while, but then it kind of declined?
Like what?
What about nuclear power?
Oh, yeah. Nuclear power is supposed to be the future.
The future. What happened?
Like, did happen.
Well, there were safety concerns, of course.
Mhm.
Chernobyl, Fukushima.
Right.
The costs of building and maintaining those plants went way up.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the whole issue of nuclear waste.
That's a big one.
Huge problem.
Yeah.
So even though nuclear power is efficient and it could be good for the environment,
Right.
it's faced a lot of obstacles.
It has.
And Ridley argues that part of the problem is that the technology hasn't been allowed to really evolve.
Because of all the regulations and fear.
Exactly. The fear has led to all these strict rules,
Right.
which made it super expensive.
So it's this balance again
It's a balance.
between safety and progress. You don't want to stifle innovation, but you also don't want to rush into things without thinking about the risks.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
And I think all these examples, they show us that innovation is not this smooth, predictable path.
It's messy.
It's messy. It's about taking risks and learning from what doesn't work.
And being flexible.
Totally. You
Yeah.
got to be able to adapt.
Okay, so we've talked about the pitfalls.
We have.
But before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about good innovations actually being resisted.
Oh, yeah, like coffee.
Coffee. Tell me more about that.
Oh, it's a wild story.
Okay.
When coffee first came to Europe, it was opposed from all sides.
Really? Like who?
Vested interests,
Yeah.
moral crusaders, even governments got involved.
So it was a bad thing.
They thought it was addictive, harmful to your health, a tool of the devil.
Wow. And now
we can't live without it.
we love our coffee.
It's true. And it's a good reminder
Right.
that even innovations that seem good to us now
Right.
can face a real uphill battle.
What about today? Are there any modern examples of this resistance to innovation?
Tons. Just look at GMOs.
Genetically modified food.
Exactly. Vaping the internet itself.
Yeah. It seems like everything new faces some kind of pushback.
It's true. And it shows this tension between innovation and resistance.
Right. It's like a constant throughout history.
It is. And it speaks to our nature, you know? We want progress, but we're also afraid of change.
Especially when it challenges the status quo.
Right, when it threatens the way things are.
So we've seen how innovation can fail.
We have.
From fraud to impracticality to bad timing.
And even just plain resistance.
So with all that in mind, I'm really curious to explore what makes for a successful, innovative society.
Yeah, what are those ingredients that allow innovation to really flourish?
What makes it thrive?
That's the big question. And luckily, Ridley tackles that too.
Okay, so he's got some answers.
He does. He argues that there are certain conditions that seem to really foster innovation.
Okay, what are they?
Things like freedom of thought, open markets, and a culture that embraces risk-taking.
Okay, so those are the key ingredients.
They seem to be.
We got to unpack all that.
We do. Let's dive into what makes for a truly innovative society. All right, so we're talking about what makes for a truly innovative society.
Yeah, what are those ingredients that make it all come together?
Well, Ridley argues that innovation flourishes in places where people are free to think, experiment, even just speculate without fear.
So freedom of thought is like the foundation.
Yeah, it's key.
But what does that actually look like in the real world?
It means having a culture where people are encouraged to be curious, to question assumptions, to challenge the way things are.
Okay.
It also means having institutions like universities and think tanks
Right.
that support intellectual freedom
Okay.
and allow for the open exchange of ideas.
So it's not just about individual creativity.
Right.
It's about the environment that either nurtures it or stifles it.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of open markets comes in.
Okay, how so?
When people are free to trade with each other, it creates incentives for innovation.
Okay.
Competition pushes people to come up with new and better ways of doing things.
It's like that invisible hand of the market guiding us toward progress.
It can be. And it's not just about creating new products and services.
Oh.
Open markets also allow for the efficient allocation of resources.
Right, so even the best ideas need support to get off the ground.
Exactly. They need funding, they need infrastructure.
So freedom and open markets are the key ingredients. Is it that simple?
They're definitely important, but Ridley also emphasizes that innovation tends to flourish in societies that are relatively prosperous.
That makes sense. If you're just trying to survive, you're not going to have much energy for inventing new things.
Right. When people have a certain level of economic security, it gives them the space to take risks, to invest in new ventures, to pursue their passions.
So a strong middle class is good for innovation.
It seems to be a key factor, and here's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Ridley argues that innovation is kind of contagious.
Contagious. Like a virus.
In a way, yeah. When innovation happens in one place, it tends to spread.
Okay.
Ideas are shared, people get inspired. Collaborations emerge.
So it's like those innovation clusters we see, like Silicon Valley.
Exactly. Those hubs of innovation, they benefit from this network of universities, research institutions, venture capitalists.
It creates this fertile ground.
It's like a positive feedback loop. Success breeds more success.
But those hotspots don't just appear overnight, do they?
No, they take time.
Years, even decades.
Of investment collaboration and a willingness to embrace new ideas.
So it takes effort to create that kind of environment.
It does. And another critical factor Ridley highlights is investment.
Okay.
Both public and private.
Right. Research and development can be expensive.
Especially in cutting-edge fields like biotech or AI.
So governments have a role to play.
They do. They can fund basic research,
Right.
create incentives for private investment, provide infrastructure.
But we've also seen how government regulations can stifle innovation.
That's true. It's a balancing act.
So how do we find that sweet spot?
That's the big question. Ridley doesn't have all the answers.
Okay.
But he encourages us to think critically about the role of government. He says we need to be mindful of unintended consequences and avoid creating unnecessary roadblocks.
So a light touch is usually better.
In many cases, yes, but it depends on the industry, the type of innovation.
Right.
Sometimes a more hands-on approach is needed,
Right.
especially when it comes to public safety and health.
It's about finding the right balance.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that innovation isn't just about inventing new gadgets.
Right. It's about how those innovations are used in society.
It's about how they change the way we live and work.
Okay, so what's the takeaway here? What's Ridley's main point about all this?
Well, his central argument is that innovation is an evolutionary process.
Okay.
It's driven by trial and error adaptation and the gradual accumulation of knowledge over time.
So it's not about predicting the future.
Nope.
It's about creating the conditions for progress.
That's it. And that means embracing uncertainty, tolerating failure, learning from our mistakes.
It's all part of the process.
It's all part of it.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've covered a lot today, from debunking that myth of the lone genius,
Right.
to exploring what makes a truly innovative society.
And we've seen how innovation is this messy, unpredictable, but essential force that shapes our world.
It's about solving problems, improving our lives, expanding what's possible.
So as you go about your day, keep an eye out for those everyday innovations.
Those little improvements that make things a little bit better.
And don't be afraid to challenge assumptions. Experiment. Embrace the unexpected.
Because who knows, you might just spark the next big breakthrough.
You never know.
That's a great thought to leave us with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of innovation.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep innovating.